All right. Well, hello everyone. My name is Diego and I am a student at Metro State University. This presentation is part of Cyber 332 led by Professor Monmun. And today I'll be talking about the firewall misconfiguration and its consequences. So what is a firewall? A firewall is a security system or network device that monitors and controls inbound and outbound network traffic based on predefined rules that you yourself can set. It acts as a barrier between a trusted internal network and untrusted external networks by blocking unauthorized access while allowing approved traffic to pass. Now, why does it matter? Well, the main risk with firewalls come down to the attack surface. The more ports, the more open ports you have, the more chances attackers get to exploit those vulnerabilities. It also matters because almost every business today relies on networks, and no matter the size, a single breach or misconfiguration can cause major downtime and serious costs. Now, there are two main types of firewalls: a host-based firewall, which runs directly on a device like a Linux system, and it protects that single host by filtering traffic in and out of it. Then there is the network-based firewall, which is a separate physical or virtual system that protects the entire network segment. So it basically acts like a control point for all the connected devices to it. Now, firewall misconfiguration happens when rules are not set properly or they're set incorrectly, not properly maintained. A few examples of this is leaving unnecessarily ports open or allowing access from any IP address, which then exposes the network to unwanted traffic. Another common issue is not using a default deny policy. Instead of restricting access, the firewall d- ends up allowing connections that should be blocked, giving attackers that opportunity to discover and exploit the service. Now, on to common mistakes. These include things like leaving SSH open to everyone, which basically hands attackers a front door, or things like opening ports temporarily and forgetting to close them later. Another one is allowing traffic from any open source, which can let untrusted connections slip through. And finally, not reviewing firewall configurations regularly, which means outdated data or risky rules stay in place way longer than they should. Next up, the attack surface concept. The attack surface is basically all the possible entry points an attacker could use, meaning every port is potential doorway in. The main idea is very simple. The more ports exposed, the larger the attack surface, which makes it easier for an attacker to find its way in. And but a properly configured firewall helps shrink that service by limiting exposure and closing unnecessary ports. All right. Now we have a few real world attack methods. In real scenarios, attackers don't just guess randomly. They follow a process. Th- They usually start with port scanning using tools like Nmap to find open ports or services on the firewall. And if they spot something, then they move to credential reuse, trying known username, password, credentials for your account. And finally, if they were able to get in, they exploit exposed services that should have never been accessible in the first place. And all this became possible because of a simple firewall misconfiguration. Now I'm going to reach a little more in depth about credential reuse. It's a very common attack method where many users you reuse the same username and password across multiple different systems, services, and then attackers take advantage of this by testing those known credentials on exposed services, like I mentioned earlier. And this technique is known as credential stuffing. If there's no multi-factor authentication and the credentials are valid, the attacker can log in directly with almost no effort. All right, now to what happens after. Once the attack Once the attacker gains access, they really don't just stop there. They start exploring the system to see what they can reach, such as checking files, stored passwords, or anything useful to them and to harm. From there, things can get worse. They might move to other systems on the network, especially if there's no segmentation in place, which this is known as lateral movement. And it means one compromised device can quickly turn into a serious network-wide breach. Then we move on to the impacts on businesses. The impacts can be really serious, starting with data exposure, where sensitive information is accessed or even stolen. And there's also a risk of financial manipulation, like altering records or transactions that can lead to ransom demands. And in some cases, attackers even reach payment systems or POS systems, which directly affecting revenue and customer trust of that business. So what begun as a simple open port can quickly turn into major financial damage. Now I'll move into a short demo where I can show how to check the firewall configurations on Linux and see which services are open. Then I'll explain why having them open it is a little risky and how to fix it by removing unnecessarily access and restrictions um, connections properly. And then at the end, I'll show how logs can be used to monitor activity. Nothing too deep, just enough to show how firewalls can get misconfigured very easily. Oh, over. All right, so first I'm going to check the firewall if it is active. So as you can see, the firewall is running. But if the firewall isn't running, then nothing is being filtered, which would already be a major security issue. Now, give me a sec. Now I'm going to list the current firewall rules. Oh, give me a sec. Yeah, right. So this shows which services are allowed through the firewall. For example, here we have right here, we have SSH, and if SSH is open here, it means remote access to this specific system is allowed. And the issue is if if this if this is open to all IP addresses, then anyone could attempt to use the same connection I made earlier to log into my Windows, log into the Linux laptop through Windows SSH. And that's where attacks like credential reuse become a lot more serious. And, and so now I'm going to remove that exposure. And you could do that by saying the command. There we go. It has been removed, but we do have to reload the firewall. There we go. And now if we run the same command again, SSH has been removed. And this reduces the attack surface by removing the unnecessary entry point to the system. And also, a better approach instead of removing access, if you don't really want to remove it, you can restrict it using this command. This command over here, and you just have to have the specific IP address to allow access. Obviously, nothing goes through, but and just you can restrict it to just one IP address to not let just everyone in. Yes. Now, finally, um, I'm going to check the logs for SSH activity, and we can do that by. Now here, these logs show login attempts and connections over time. This helps administrators monitor and see repeated login attempts. For example, multiple failed login attempts could indicate a brute force attack or credential-based attack. So overall, this demonstrates how an exposed service can be accessed and how proper firewall configurations can significantly reduce that risk. All right. Now, after the demo, it's important to talk about defense in depth, which security isn't just one control, it's multiple layers working together. And the idea again is simple. If one layer fails, others can prevent or limit the attack. For example, if a port is exposed, multi-factor authentication can still block that access. And again, even if access is gained, network segmentation and permissions can contain that damage. Now, let's go over some of the best practices. First, use a default deny configuration, meaning only traffic that's necessarily is allowed through. It's also smart to consistently review and audit firewall rules, even on your local systems. It's always good to just make sure everything checks out and everything is configured correctly. And again, as I mentioned earlier, multi-factor authentication as an extra layer of protection against credential reuse and those attacks. In the end, firewall misconfiguration might sound small and uncommon, but very serious. And even a single open port can increase risk and give attackers a way in. But with proper configuration and layered security controls, both the impact and likelihood of an attack can be greatly, greatly reduced. So yeah, that is it for my presentation. Thank you for your time and have a good day. Thank you.